Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're jumping into Asia. It's always been this place with, huge opportunities,
Absolutely.
but also real headaches with the rules for global mobility teams.
hmm
And right now, things feel like they're reaching a critical point.
Yeah.
The idea we're digging into today is kind of like golden handcuffs. Asia's becoming incredibly expensive for companies, but also really demanding, regulatorily speaking, for the expats themselves.
That's exactly the right way to frame it, I think. We've looked at a whole load of data and reports covering key places, Japan, India, Singapore, Thailand.
Right.
And our goal here isn't just the headlines. We want to get into the technical stuff, the structural challenges that are basically forcing everyone to rethink how they handle expat pay and risk across the whole continent.
It's about knowing exactly where the pressure points are.
Precisely.
And those pressure points sound pretty dramatic. I mean, we should probably start with the sheer cost, right?
Def?
Japan and India seem to have really cemented their place as the two priciest countries in Asia for the whole expat package.
Yeah, they consistently come out on top.
But, if the cost doesn't push people out, maybe policy changes will. Like Thailand, huge spot for long-term residents, just made this massive tax policy shift. It sounds like it has global ripples.
It really does. But let's break down that financial side first, because the amount companies are investing to put talent in these key Asian cities is, well, it's staggering.
It really is. So we know Japan and India are at the peak for overall costs, salary, benefits, tax, the whole lot. They're setting the high watermark for the region.
And Japan is maybe the best example. The numbers are almost hard to believe. Our data suggests the average cost for an employer putting an expat in Tokyo. It can easily go over $370,000 a year.
Wow.
And you hear that figure and you immediately think, why? It's definitely not just the salary.
Yeah, that number really challenges the old idea that parts of Asia are automatically cheaper postings. So where does that 370 actually go?
Understanding that cost breakdown is critical. In Japan, a huge chunk, like maybe 60, even 70% of that total cost comes from regulations and the need for really high-end housing.
Okay.
You've got mandatory, expensive local benefits, big Social Security payments, and then finding executive-level housing, which costs a fortune because it's so scarce in the main business areas.
So that makes Japan different from, say, Singapore, where taxes are pretty low generally.
Exactly. In Japan, the pressure is systemic, it's regulatory. India's expensive too, but the cost structure is a bit different.
How so?
In places like Mumbai or Bangalore, the package cost is really pushed up by what you might call infrastructure surcharges.
Like what? Security,
Yeah.
logistics?
Yes, security, complex logistics, just the sheer operational hassle. That stuff needs to be built into the support system for the employee. It's not just tax, it's the cost of smoothing out the friction on the ground.
That's a great distinction. Systemic rules versus operational complexity. And either way, these costs are climbing, which means compensation teams can't just use generic models anymore, right?
Absolutely not. And what's really interesting here is how this makes cost of living allowances, ARLA, so much more important. It's not just a simple adjustment. It becomes a strategic tool for keeping people.
Right, for retention.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Companies have got to keep a really close eye on indexing CLA against local inflation, which can be super volatile. Local shortages or sudden currency swings can just eat away at purchasing power almost overnight.
So keeping talent really hinges on them feeling like they're being treated fairly financially.
Exactly. Perceived fairness is key.
Okay, this cost pressure, it leads us straight to Singapore. It was the go-to hub for decades, right? Stable, low tax, super efficient.
Not the classic example.
But even Singapore seems to be facing its own specific intense cost issues that are hitting company budgets hard.
Singapore is the perfect case study of a mature market that's just physically limited. Tax is still good, yes, but housing costs, and this is a big one, international school fees are reaching a critical point for families moving there.
And we're not just talking generally expensive. What are the specific market things driving these spikes? Is it just supply and demand?
Pretty much. On the housing side, after the pandemic, Singapore had major supply issues made worse by government land policies. We're seeing huge jumps in private rents, especially for the kind of places senior execs need, high-end condos or landed properties.
Those are often the only places that meet company housing standards for longer stays, I guess.
Often, yeah.
Yeah.
So even for companies using things like service departments for the initial period while someone looks for a permanent place, the budget for that temporary housing has just ballooned.
Okay, so even that flexible, short-term solution gets way more expensive. That makes it a tougher sell for families who need stability, especially with kids.
Precisely. And the second big one, international schooling that's usually non-negotiable for expat families.
Right.
The lack of spaces and the fees going up mean a company could be looking at, what, $30,000 to $50,000 per child per year, easily. You add those two together, rent and schooling, and suddenly Singapore can look more expensive than comparable cities back in the U.S. for a family move.
That's a powerful reason to maybe look elsewhere.
Yeah.
But okay, let's shift gears. If costs don't force expats out, governments are now using policy changes. Thailand's move sounds like a game changer.
It is probably the most significant policy shift we've seen in Southeast Asia for expats recently. Thailand was always popular with long-termers, retirees, partly because of this, let's say, generous interpretation of tax rules on overseas income.
Right.
But that fundamentally changed starting January 2024.
And you mentioned earlier, crucially, this wasn't a new law passed, but a reinterpretation. That sounds subtle but important. What actually changed?
They basically revisited how they read a specific part of the Thai Revenue Code about personal income tax and residency. Before, there was this widely used loophole that let people avoid Thai tax on money earned overseas if they just waited until the next calendar year to bring it into Thailand.
So it was all about the timing of the transfer.
Exactly. Earned abroad, transferred later, broke the lien for tax purposes, while the reinterpretation slams that door shut.
Right.
The new position is crystal clear. Any assessable income you bring into Thailand is now taxable there, no matter when you earned it. The focus now is purely on your tax residency status and the money actually arriving in Thailand.
Wow. That's a huge shift in liability.
Yeah.
It means people living there need to take immediate, serious action.
Absolutely.
They'd need incredibly detailed financial records, potentially going back years, even decades, to prove the source and timing of every single baht they transfer in.
The knock-on effects are massive, not just for compliance burdens, but for people deciding whether to stay. Many retirees or people living off investments move there based on that old favorable rule.
So they might now look at other places in the region, places with simpler or lower taxes.
It seems very likely some will. They might start looking for alternative spots in Southeast Asia that are still tax-friendly.
But hang on, if Thailand is making itself less attractive to wealthy expats and retirees who often bring in a lot of money, buy property, spend locally, isn't that potentially damaging their own economy?
Right.
Especially real estate and tourism. Did they weigh that trade-off?
It's definitely a calculated risk. The government seems to view it as necessary to boost tax revenue and make their fiscal policy more standard, more robust.
Okay.
But they're also trying to offset the potential negative impact. They've launched a countermeasure specifically aimed at reversing brain drain, getting skilled Thais to come home.
Interesting. So a two-pronged strategy. Tighten the rules for passive income coming in, but offer sweeteners for skilled professionals.
Exactly. It's strategically quite clever, actually.
So what are the incentives? What do skilled Thais get if they return?
If you're a returning professional with specific skills they need, think tech, R&D, future industries, you can get a really competitive flat income tax rate of just 17% on that professional income.
17%. That's a pretty big draw compared to standard rates, I imagine.
It's a significant cut, yeah. Aims squarely at competing globally for that talent.
It gets better for the companies hiring them, too.
It does. The employer gets a benefit as well. Companies hiring these specific returning skilled workers might get a 50% tax break on the salary costs for those employees.
Okay, so a direct financial nudge for companies to hire top local talent, boosting innovation, growing the economy. That makes sense?
Yep, that's the goal.
So zooming out, we're seeing these two big forces across Asia. On one hand, the rising structural cost housing, mandatory benefits in hubs like Tokyo and Singapore.
Right.
And on the other hand, governments actively closing regulatory loopholes and tightening tax enforcement, like we see in Thailand.
That really is the big picture. The Thai tax change, the cost vigilance everywhere else, it reflects a wider global trend. Governments all over are getting tougher on expat tax rules to collect more revenue. The days of easily sheltering international income seem to be, well, fading fast.
So if you're a company operating in these shifting markets, what does adapting look like? It can't just be about throwing more money at salaries, can it?
No, the strategy needs to be smarter than that. Companies might need to move away from home-based pay models towards more localized packages, especially in places like Singapore, high cost but low tax.
Okay.
They also need to review KOLA, much more often, maybe quarterly, not just yearly, to genuinely protect people's spending power and keep them from leaving.
Makes sense.
And they need reliable partners on the ground. You mentioned service departments earlier. Finding providers who can offer stable, corporate-friendly housing options becomes really important to manage that rental market risk.
Right, managing that volatility. And what about for the individual expat listening to us right now? What are the absolute must-do steps they need to take to handle all this complexity?
Number one is understanding your tax nexus, basically, where you legally count as living or doing business. Those rules are everything now. You have to know them inside out.
Okay, residency rules first.
Second, obsessive record keeping. Like really obsessive. Especially with that tie change as an example, just showing a bank transfer isn't enough anymore. You need proof of where every dollar came from originally. Meticulous documentation.
You really can't afford to wing it anymore.
Definitely not. And finally, get proper professional advice, someone who really specializes in cross-border tax issues. International tax law is just too complex now, especially with governments using tech to track money flows way more effectively. It's not a DIY job.
Okay, this has been a really eye-opening deep dive. It definitely reshapes how you think about Asia for business professionals. Those golden handcuffs feel real. Incredibly expensive packages, soaring housing costs, and much tougher, even retrospective, tax rules. Staying alert and ready to adapt isn't just good advice. It sounds essential for survival.
It really is. We've seen the shift as structural. It's happening globally, but maybe beyond the general advice like get an expert, here's a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. In the next year or so, as governments keep tightening these rules, what specific, maybe subtle detail is going to be the most critical bit of knowledge for an expat? Will it be how they define a workday for tax residency? Or how using a corporate credit card impacts things? Maybe where your digital assets are technically held? The line between being compliant and facing serious liability seems to be getting finer and finer, measured in these tiny regulatory details.
That's definitely something to think about. What's the next microscopic detail that could trip you up? A great question to ponder until our next deep dive. Thanks for joining us.